Hey everyone, welcome back to the Purifying Place. Today I simply want to tell a story, and it's the story of how my daughter's birth was my spiritual awakening. And my daughter was born extremely premature at 23 weeks at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. And it has been the most pivotal moment in my life thus far. And the reason why I want to share the story today is because it's really the foundation and the catalyst and the reason why I ultimately was able to start the Purifying Place. Because of this very, people would call traumatic or troubling time that I was able to move through and grow from and learn from and basically transform and alchemize into an experience that is not only healed but deeply fulfilling. And from there, I've been able to create even more beautiful things in my life, right? From this moment, from this experience, from this situation that I thought could never, um, that I thought I could never accept as um, a positive experience. And so, when she was born, I had no idea that this was going to happen. Obviously, I wasn't expecting it. But, the shutdown happened in March. And here I thought I was going to have the most cushy um, maternity leave because I could start early since I'm a teacher and I worked from home because of the shutdown. And so I thought, how great is this? I'm pregnant. I get to work from home, stay at home sooner than I thought, and just be really comfortable. And of course, just a couple months later, not even a couple months later, my water spontaneously breaks and I go to the hospital and they admit me. And what happens here is just a series of situations where it seems hopeless. When the doctors tell you, do you want to continue this pregnancy because, you'll have less than, I think it was 30% chance of survival, maybe it was 25. And if she does survive, she's more than likely to have definitely one, but more likely two or more very severe disabilities. And as someone who is, first time mom, that's not the news that you're hoping for. In fact, it's soul crushing, right? To hear the doctor say that. And um, I knew I couldn't live with myself if I just gave up then and aborted the pregnancy. And so, even though despite those odds, I decided ultimately to go all in. And I still remember to this day the doctor asking me, "So you want full resuscitation?" And I thought, well, what does that even mean? You hear that word, maybe you've heard in a movie or somewhere else. And so I knew what it meant, but it didn't fully feel real, right? What do you mean fully resuscitate? And so he explained it to me, we're going to do everything in our power to um, keep your daughter alive after she's born. And so, yes, we agreed to go all in. We agreed for full resuscitation. And years later, after my daughter ultimately leaves the hospital, and I'm sharing this story at a with a priest, he tells me, with all due respect, I know the doctor said this was a full resuscitation, but what it really was a resurrection. And I love, the play with the language there, right? Resuscitation, bringing back to life, and ultimately resurrection, right? And what I realized through this experience is not, it was a transformational experience where my own life was recovered, where I was being resurrected. I was being brought to this higher level of consciousness through the seemingly dark period. Because what happens is, when you're faced with death, when you're faced with, extreme situations like this, it forces you to release control. And I realized, before this, I had been slowly building this relationship with God. You see, I started talking with God. I started saying, are you really real? If you're listening, and sharing my thoughts, sharing my feelings, sharing what was on my heart. And I'm realizing now that this experience was very much an initiation into deeper faith, into full surrender, into the conviction that God is real. And um, so what happened was, after she, I tried to stay pregnant for as long as I could, and I was being poked and prodded, and luckily, the hospital where I planned to give birth, they had a high level NICU. I think it was level 3, whatever the top level is. And so I still remember one of the nurses saying, if you were to have a child born extremely premature, you are in the right place. So at least know that, and feel for what it's worth, like, let that soothe you, because this is a very scary experience for someone who um never had to deal with any medical issues before, and it's just scary for anyone, really, right? And so my daughter is born. They resuscitate her. She is brought to the NICU, and I'm forced to face this fear head on, alone, by myself, because we cannot go into the NICU room, with family members. I couldn't even go with my husband to begin with. I had to go alone because of the COVID restrictions. And I realize, again, all of these situations and events are moments in the during those times I thought, oh, how cruel is this? How bad can it get? This is like punishment. What did I do to deserve this? All of those imposter, not all of those you know, wild thoughts that you just think over and over again, and just self-defeating thoughts, anxious thoughts, fearful thoughts. And now, in hindsight, moving through all of that, I realized it was an opportunity for me to face head on what I was deeply afraid of. And that was giving birth and, surprise, surprise, right? Giving birth and death, ultimately. And so I went into that room and I faced that head on, and I saw my daughter, born at 1.5 pounds, very tiny. Um, her first diaper was a cotton ball, right? And so, her eyes weren't even open yet. She's the small, very small child. And it's like your heart just breaks. And I thought at the time my heart was breaking. I thought it was going to destroy me. I thought, how could I survive this? And now, again, I have that perspective, have that vision now, and seeing that my heart wasn't being broken. It was being broken open. It was being expanded. There was this capacity for me to hold more love, more gratitude, more faith, because of the experience that that I was moving through. And ultimately, she stayed in the NICU for 5 months, and every single day I visited her one, two, 3 times a day. Um, and each time there was something that had to be overcome, right? It was And I realized, again, it was another way to show me to surrender all that is to God. Because even when I went in for my surgery, I had this overwhelming sense of peace in my heart and my soul and my being, that everything was going to be okay, even though it felt like danger, danger, alert, right? Something bad's gonna happen. There was just this sense and this peace and this knowing everything would be all right. Meanwhile, my husband's having a breakdown. He's crying his eyes out. He's so worried about me. I'm being wheeled in to have my C-section. and all this commotion is going on with the doctors, and it just but to feel that peace and feel it in my heart, knowing that everything's gonna be okay, I didn't realize it then. That was my soul speaking to me. That was God speaking to me through my intuition, assuring me that everything is gonna work out the way it's supposed to. And in that moment, unknowingly, I released the control of the outcome. I was no longer worried about what's going to happen next, what happened before. I was fully present in the moment. And that experience forced me to release control of the outcome because there was no other way out but to accept what is, accept the totality of the situation. And in that, way of being, you accept the full flow of life. You're no longer working against the flow of life. And that alignment was the peace that I felt in that moment. And, there's a series of moments throughout this time where I realized God is showing me how to release control, how to let go, how to surrender and live in that divine flow with the world, because we do not have to live in this sense of fear, sense of control, sense of contraction our whole life. And ultimately, this was mirroring to me how I had been living my life. I had been living my life from fear. I had been living it from survival, from struggle. And so ultimately, this experience reflected to me the state that I had been living in for so long. And the reason why I truly believe my soul and God created this experience for me is because it had finally came time to ascend from that, to surpass that, to move through that and evolve in my consciousness. I did not have to choose that way of being anymore. And this experience showed me that is how I was living. And although that's how I was living, I am choosing now to live in a different state of consciousness. That was ultimately my resurrection, my ascension into a higher level way of a higher consciousness, an awareness, right? And so um, it's interesting how we have moments in our life that we ultimately judge them and see them through the lens of our limited perspective of this is awful, this is terrible, this is going to kill me, this is can amount to no good. How is this going to be how is this going to amount to anything good for me, right? But even in the Bible, there's like, they say blessed are the weak, blessed are the hungry, blessed are the poor. And like those sayings always like confused me because I'm like, how would they be blessed? And now I realize when I'm at my weakest point, when I am at this point of just being broken down, I realize I couldn't see it then, but it was a blessing because it helped me break through the illusion of needing. And that breakthrough of the illusion allowed me to release the control of needing anything and just accepting what is. And that ultimately connects you back to your remembrance of God, connects you back to the remembrance of you are one with all that is, connects you back to your ultimate power of your eternal self, who does not need to strive, does not need to yearn, does not need to mourn, because you are the totality of all that is. You are part of the one, the unity consciousness. And feeling that, knowing that now, I couldn't see it then. At the beginning of COVID, with a baby in the hospital, living how I had been living. And so sometimes, you know, a lot of the times, these trials, and that's why people think they're tests, these trials are really opportunities, portals for expansion in our way of being, in our way of thinking, in our level of awareness. And so ultimately, going through this has showed me that we can choose to live in this moment, this way of being of surrender, moment to moment, in the present moment, in accordance with divine flow, living by our highest will, God's will, our own will, and allowing that to let us lead our life. Because ultimately, that's going to bring the greatest joy, the greatest blessings, um, because we're not restricting our own abundance. We're not restricting our own unconditional love, right? We're accepting all that is when we can move in totality, move and flow with that unity. And I truly believe discovering this is the reason why my daughter was able to come out of the NICU unscathed, come out of the NICU perfectly healthy and whole, despite the brain bleeds, the holes in the heart, the intubation because she's going to breathe on her own, the blindness, the possibility of blindness, having to have the bilirubin lights, all these things, right? That just one thing after the other that they said could possibly go wrong. Um, her possibly having, you know, a learning disability or, problems with her movement and all the problems with eating because she was intubated. There's so many things that they listed that could go possibly wrong. And learning to surrender the outcome, hold the image of pure acceptance, unconditional love, and gratitude for her, and seeing her in her healthiest, holiest state is ultimately, I think, obviously, I'm not saying doctors and medicine, none of that helped. I definitely, obviously, am so grateful to them and still have a connection with them and still speak with some of her nurses. And I have so much gratitude for them. And at the same note, I think this piece, this energetic, this spiritual piece, this emotional piece, together as a whole has helped this outcome, right? And I I had this now from this whole experience, I'm also writing a book now about this experience. And one of the most defining moments during this time was the day I had to leave my daughter behind in the hospital because, after I gave birth to her, I was discharged eventually from the hospital after a couple or a few days, and I had to leave her in the NICU, and I was so tormented. Felt so guilty. I was so heartbroken leaving that hospital, and felt like I was leaving her behind, abandoning her, even though I clearly wasn't. I just felt so terrible that, she had to be there fighting for her life while I, got to go home. And really, that night when I couldn't sleep, I heard a voice, or it was felt more like a knowing, like this rush of energy, in the middle of the night when my husband's awake, snoring away next to me. And I feel this knowing of this voice ultimately telling me that, Lily will rise from this, just like her name says, Lily Rose, because, we had chosen the name Lily Rose months before she was born, because it's such a beautiful name. It does have some connections to my name and my husband's mother's name, but you know, and I love flowers, so those are two of my favorite flowers. But Lily Rose, the voice told me Lily Rose will rise from this, and again, I felt that unwavering peace. I felt that deep knowing. I felt that assurance in my heart and my soul that everything was going to be okay. And I thought, whoa, that was so weird. That's so interesting. And I knew it was the voice of God. I know now that was the voice of God. And the whole time my daughter's in the NICU, I'm thinking and speaking and listening to God and saying, if that was really true, God, if Lily will rise from this, and this was like for early on when she, was the worst of it, right? and 1.5 pounds, intubated, bilirubin lights, hole in the heart, brain bleeds, possibility of like all the things that they've said. And I thought, wow, God, if Lily really will rise from this, I will commit my life to knowing you. I will commit my life in devotion to you. I will commit my life to whatever you have me do, whatever you um, would like me to do. Whatever that will is of me, I will do it willingly because of what I've experienced here. If really that is the truth. And like my promise was, I kept that promise, and which led me to starting the Purifying Place, because that's another thing that happened. A few years after she was born, I got the call from God to start the Purifying Place. And I just, and then all these the symbolism with the lily and Jesus and rising from the dead. And ultimately, I believe Jesus was modeling for us um, that ascension process in consciousness, and all the things that, that tie together in not over identifying with the physical, and realizing that the energetic state, your consciousness, is very powerful. The way you think and feel, and your alignment um, with that harmony between your mind, body, and soul, is what creates your experience here on this earth. And so I realized, me surrendering the outcome, having ultimate faith in God's will for my life, knowing whatever it is, I will accept it wholly, that it is meant for me, that it is for my highest good, believing in that truly, being grateful for each moment, ultimately brought the highest outcome possible for me. And I learned that this was one of the hardest times of my life. And I was being broken down to the point where I was forced to release control. Because in the past, I would just tighten my grip. I would do things until I was exhausted, right? I would make sure it happened. I would control, control, control. And all of that reflected this feeling of unease, this feeling of distrust, this feeling of I'm scared of not knowing, this feeling of I have to do it all because who loves me, who supports me? No, but it feels like nobody does, so I have to take care of everything. It ultimately was all fear-based ways of behaving. And in this process of releasing this control and trusting in the divine, trusting in God, allows you to accept God into your life, right? And because think about it, when we're at our worst point, we turn to God because sometimes we don't even know who else to turn to, especially at this point. Um, my husband, it was just as sad and broken. I felt as broken as I was. Our parents and our families were distanced because it was COVID. It just, there were people wishing us well and wanting to help, but ultimately, we knew, there's a part of you that knows, like, there's a part of us, there's a reason why so many people turn to God at their worst moments, right? And that decision to make a connection with God is what allows God to come through, to come through you as a vessel because you're no longer blocking and restricting that channel. And when you feel that, when you have this experience, that flow, that divine flow through you, and living in accordance with that will and that knowing is what transforms your life, is what purifies you from the inside out. Because you're no longer disconnecting from yourself. You're no longer disconnecting from your truth as a child of God, as someone who is 100% loved unconditionally and accepted purely for just being who you are. You allow that to come through when you release the control. And so, um, this process taught me that. And now I've dedicated my life to understanding that. I've dedicated my life to transforming that within me so that I can help others do that as well. And every time I see my daughter and I know how far she has risen up from, you know, the start of her life, it motivates me, it inspires me, it reminds me of God's truth, of God's promise, of God's fulfillment, of God's abundance. And ultimately, that is what I wish to transmit to everyone who I encounter, to everyone who seeks the purifying place within themselves, because it's always there waiting, being, existing. And it's just a second, it's just a moment away. It's just a level of awareness away. And it's accessible always. It doesn't matter what you might be going through, it doesn't matter how devastating things might seem. That level of awareness where peace is felt wholly, where love is unconditional and acceptance is pure and everything is okay, that level of awareness is accessible in any moment. It's just our awareness that blocks it from us. And so we can choose our where we place our attention. We can choose how we use our energy. And I realize we have our own free will. And now that, and it's funny how my whole life, and a lot of people I'm sure can relate, is I've used my free will to do all the things I thought I was meant to do all the things that I thought would move the needle forward, to do all the things that I thought would fulfill me, make me successful, um, make my parents proud of me. I would do all those things um, because I was always trying to control, in a sense, right? And I realize now my will is only to follow God's will because I know God's will is the highest will for my life. God's will is really my own will, the highest level. And so I don't even think of what my will is. I might be aware of it. I might see, I honor the desires that are placed to my heart by God, but I know they come from God. They don't come from me. They don't come from the ego. They don't come from what I think people want. They don't come from my conditioning. I allow God's will to lead my life now. And I think that is what transforms your life. That is what catapults you into your next level. That is what creates lasting transformation, as far as I've seen. And that is what I hope to bring to the people that I encounter, people that I coach, the people that I do energy healing for, the people I hold sessions for, teach things to. the people I meet on YouTube, spreading my message. And um, I just think this, experience here on Earth could be so much different for so many of us if we can access this and learn this. And that's part of the reason why I share what I share on YouTube. And um, yeah, I just wanted to share that. I wanted to share part of my story today. And like I said, I am in the process of writing a book about this. And it's going to be a spiritual memoir and inspirational memoir, and also part guidebook, also to guide people through their own purifying path, through their own process of breaking through this situation or event or moments of their life where they feel like they can't break through, they're stuck, and helping people, guiding them through that to find deeper fulfillment, deeper alignment, deeper connection to God, to themselves, and live their authentic, empowering truth. And so, thank you so much for listening to my story if you gotten to the end of this video. And I look forward to sharing more videos with you soon. Again, I wanted to just do a story time for this video. I thought it was a lot of fun. And stay tuned for more. See you next time. Bye.